the CRMC.
It is, but I would also say that it doesn't mean that we can't have policies saying that we need to further, if we felt it was very important, then, you know, in the last comprehensive plan, we had policies and strategies in there to further protect, say, groundwater areas with private wells. You know, so that helped us develop regulations that were more strict than the state. So even though something is regulated by the state, it doesn't mean the town can't take a stance if we felt something was important. I'm not saying it is, but, you know, I guess that's where I would say that some of these, even though they're regulated by the state, you know, if it's a big enough point where the town feels it's very important, then we can always put it in as a policy to adopt stricter regulations, or just, you know, support DEM in their protection of whatever.
That's where you have to be careful how you word the question. If you ask the question, should habitat be protected?
Right, you really need to make sure that, I agree.
Probably have a positive answer.
I think we'll try to put it down in that, hopefully.
Lisa, I just have one more question.
Yeah.
About the mooring use policy and allocating the moorings, that's something that Harvard clearly has been working on on a very, you know, concrete basis. I think it's a live question myself. I think it's really a valid one to put in there. So I'm wondering, how does that work if we have that as part of the comprehensive plan?
Well, it would be appropriate if it's something, I think what I would do, if that gets a high number, in other words, if that's one of our top 4 tonight after we leave, I think I would probably call the Harbor Commission chair and talk to him about what kind of information they think would be valuable. Yeah.
Okay.
And this is going to take a lot of research and a lot of, in order to develop these issues into questions.
But I think whatever that question is should also somehow include the fairness of mooring, you know, mooring availability to people.
Right, and a lot of the questions, as you saw from the last survey, really have to provide a good amount of education in a concise way to get people to give a valid answer.
Yeah.
But in the comprehensive plan on the revision, based on the results of the survey, we could actually develop an action item that would be for the Harbor Commission's action.
Correct.
Policy.
Correct. Yes, all the boards and committees.
Okay, good.
Yeah, when you look at the action table in the back, all the boards and committees have responsibilities out of that.
Yeah, okay.
And what we did after the last comprehensive plan is basically split up those responsibilities and send each board and committee and department a memo saying, here's your responsibilities and here's your timetable for accomplishing those
I
with
assume
those
what we were, I was before my time they did, but I assume if we were going to give them a responsibility, we get their input on that before we actually publish it.
Not necessarily, yeah. I mean, all the boards and committees reviewed the comprehensive plan. They were given a draft document, you know, more than 5 or 6 months ahead of time. We're encouraged to, you know, review it with your board and look at your responsibilities. So yes, in that fashion they work. All right, so now we're on to wildlife and vegetation. There's only 4 questions, so when you have a chance to vote, I mean, things that have less numbers in the categories, you know, I would encourage you to really look at them. If you don't want to use all 4 of your dots, don't use all 4 of your dots, because that will make it confusing. Everybody has the same number. So anyway, so I think these were, the only thing that wasn't clear on here was habitat protection for birds. Anybody want to elaborate on that, whoever put that in?
Elimination of habitat protection for geese.
Yeah.
What's the question is basically, do we think habitat protection for birds is important?
I don't know. I need help from you all.
Is that
to kind of flush these out? Yeah, I don't know what the intent was.
I mean, we're looking for opinions, so I guess we're looking for.
I think what I'd like to see is that obviously we've got a conflict between habitat protection and view sheds and deer and coyote management. You know, in other words, if you have a lot of brush, then obviously you're giving protection to birds, and you're creating breeding places and living places for deer and coyotes, and you're also destroying view sheds. I'd like to get them in some kind of a runoff. In other words,
I think that was the intent of number 3.
well, I'd like the people of Jamestown to choose. And putting those three against each other head to head.
The way we draft the question.
Yeah, I agree. I think, in fact, the last comprehensive plan, I think it was because of you that became an issue, and I think everybody agreed that it is a big issue, and I would agree.
And if they're left as independent questions, people would say yes to all of them, and they're contradictory. So, I mean, if you were to group them in a series of questions, what is more important to you, you know?
Right.
I don't think it's a black and white issue, though. I think
It's really not.
it's the way you word the question. It might have to do with a more aggressive management of view sheds and, wooded areas and so on, so that it all comes under a planning pretext rather than just, it is what it is.
Right.
But I think if people look at it that way, they may be more sympathetic to supporting better management of the whole process.
Is there any way to have that question for each of those items, shade trees, view sheds, or certainly those two to have, do you support shade trees, for instance, on the major boulevards? So that or in other areas, so that we have maybe choices of areas to give more or less, do you strongly agree shade trees should be on Narragansett Avenue, or do you strongly disagree that shade trees should be right along the waterfront, or that to maybe give some locational choices that would allow, for instance, habitat protection to have a high priority in certain areas, and habitat protection does not have to be against view sheds, because sometimes the birds are just as happy with, brush, but it doesn't have to be 10 feet high brush. Or
I'd be willing to bet that the shade tree versus view shed issue is, though, I mean, there's been a lot of issues come up over the last 8 years we've heard here and elsewhere in the tree committee when I was on that people put up a tree and then other people get mad because it destroyed the view of the waterfront because someone put up a shade tree. And now they can't see the water, the water from their houses. They used to be able to see it, now they can't because the neighbor put up a tree. So I'm not sure a lot of regulation can do that, but they're really getting mad when the town put up a tree along the street that's blocked the view.
It was exciting.
It was very controversial issue.
Okay with wildlife vegetation?
so, do you have enough direction on what habitat protection for birds?
No, but it just won't get a lot of votes, probably, and that's okay.
Well, I think
If it's not an issue, it's not an issue. We don't want to make it an issue. Unless you can think of it.
Well, I think it's, for instance, to the birders, just wholesale taking down brush would be an issue.
Maybe.
And, there are lots of the bird count goes up and down at various times, but then certain kinds of birds need certain kinds of habitat. So I hate to not get an opinion on it and then say it's okay to get rid of, that's really low priority to Jamestowners. So I guess I'm not quite sure how it should be.
Well, just because don't think that if you don't ask a question in the survey, that it's not an important issue. Because, it may very well be, the Conservation Commission may come back to us during the process and say, they think it's a very important issue. They're certainly going to weigh in on this. We're going to have lots of public input on this. So, we're not going to be able to ask a question about everything. So, just because it's not in the survey doesn't mean that we're not going to address it in the comprehensive plan. So, what do you think anything else that I should add there? So that it makes it clear to people.
You mean as opposed to how do you feel about habitat protection for birds?
Yes.
Well, maybe it should be just one of those.
Just to help clarify for everybody here.
Maybe the habitat protection, is for birds and small animals or something is, important for the Jamestown rural character, strongly